So my name is Joshua Negrera. I'm acting director at the Center for Real Estate Finance Research at NYU Stern School of Business. I'm joined by my colleague, Devin Cremines and Marty Burger. Marty, I thought we'd start things off with a quick introduction on your background and Silverstein Properties as well.
Sure. Marty Burger, I'm CEO of Silverstein Properties. I've been with Silverstein for about 10 years. I started my career in 1987 working for Laventhal & Horwath as a real estate consultant. Was there about a year and a half. Then went to the related companies as an associate in their development group, first ever associate / analyst in their development group. Then was at Goldman Sachs' Whitehall Group for about a year and a half, and then Blackstone's real estate group for their first 3 funds for 2.5 years. Then back to Related for another 10 years. So I spent 15 years at Related. Then I was on my own. I started a firm called Artisan Real Estate Ventures that I worked with for 3.5 years, and then Silverstein.
A great career already, and a lot of time to go still. First, we'll touch on COVID-19 and how that's going to impact the real estate industry. But first, we wanted to kind of touch on what industry trends you saw prior to COVID, where you thought the real estate industry was going.
Well, look, we operate mainly in New York, and our portfolio is mainly office and residential, although we were getting into life science because we saw that as a growing field, and we still do. We developed some high-end hotels like the Four Seasons in Tribeca and the Four Seasons in Disney World at the Walt Disney World Resort in Orlando. But we operate, lease, and manage our multifamily and office properties in New York City. We expanded out to Philadelphia. We were working on projects in LA, in the Seattle, Washington area, and other parts of the country. We had done some developments in China and had opened an office in Warsaw, but we are still very New York centric in what we do in our operations and our people. We have about 483 employees, and we really felt like the office market in New York City was booming. There was probably about 30 million square feet of brand new office space built in the last 7 or 8 years, and that space was almost 100% spoken for. There were only a few more buildings that were going to get built in the next bunch of years. It's not easy to build a new building in New York City, and so we can tell years in advance which buildings will get built and how big they are, and they usually get pre-leased as they're getting built because they're so large. And so we have a 400 million square foot market, and we didn't really add that much space. And because the world has become so global, if you're an Ernst & Young accounting firm or an international advertising agency, and you come to your old office space in New York City, and then you go to Sydney, Australia, or Hong Kong, or London, and you go to these brand new office spaces that have been built, and then you come back to your home in New York City in this old office building, you say, wow, we really have to update our space. So New York was in need of new office space, as is San Francisco, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, the major gateway cities in the States, LA. And so we felt there was a real need to compete globally on the office space frontier. And that's why I think that we'll continue to see office space being built where it makes sense. So that was a trend. Multifamily, still strong product type. Obviously industrial, especially the last mile space, continues to be very popular. Although Blackstone seems to be gobbling it all up and continues to be doing well. And I think it's, even more so post-pandemic, and we'll see what happens there. And, we even though we built some luxury hotels, we don't see ourselves as long-term owners of it pre-pandemic, because we didn't operate those, and we like to own long-term assets that we operate because that's what we control. Post-pandemic, it's anyone's guess of what's going to happen. Hopefully, long-term, everything's going to be just fine. In the short term, it's going to be a mess. So we'll see what happens.
Right. Quickly touching on office space. We've seen a lot of co-working spaces and things like that where people are sitting very close to each other. given what we've seen with the pandemic, do you feel like tenants are going to go back to the more traditional secluded office type thing, or do you think this will pass? People will be okay with sitting within a foot of each other?
I think the short term, it's going to be rough. I think longer term, people will get more comfortable with it again. I don't think it'll be as prevalent. We operate our own type of co-working space called Silver Suites. It's not as open architecture as a WeWork space. It's more like an upscale Regis HQ space. We actually experienced about almost 80% of our tenants paying rent in April, so that was pretty good. And we expect the same in May. And it's more about renting offices than it is renting a space at a desk or just it's not a membership type thing. So that's why it's a little bit different. It's not real co-working. But we find it very beneficial to our tenants, our major tenants in our buildings, because if you're an advertising firm and you all of a sudden you get the Pepsi account and you need to beef up for 30 people and you don't want to take permanent space because it's only a 6-month assignment, you come and you take 4 offices from us and those people go work there, or 30 desks or whatever it is. And then 6 months later, you can give it back. And so one of the first things that some of our tenants ask, prospective tenants ask when they come to visit space at some of our buildings is, do you have co-working or swing space in the building for us if we need temporary space? And that works for accounting firms, for law firms, for, if you're on a big case and they've got to move their Dallas litigation firm up for, for 6 months for a case or whatever. And so we found that very beneficial for the tech firms too. When we leased Spotify their space at 4 World Trade Center, before they moved into their space, they took 100% of our co-working space, our Silver Suite space at 4 World Trade Center. Uber right now is sitting in our Silver Suite space at 3 World Trade Center. I'm at 4 World Trade Center, and we'll be moving into 3 World Trade Center.
It's definitely great to have that flexible space. I know Devin had a question as well.
Yeah. Then thanks again for doing this, Marty. My question is, Silverstein has kind of had a reputation for really stepping in and helping the city through a crisis, especially with the redevelopment of all the work you've done with World Trade Center after 9/11. This is kind of a different type of crisis that New York City is experiencing now. Obviously, there's a lot of state and local money being spent to combat the crisis, but in the current economic cycle, there's not as much tax revenue and things like that being collected. What's your outlook for New York City following this?
Look, New York has had a lot of different crises over the decades and centuries, and this is another one, none like we've ever seen before. Different animal. We'll have to tackle it in a different way. But we're tough New Yorkers and we'll get through it. We just have to figure out how. It's unknown how we'll get through it, but I think we will, and we'll come out strong. And 5 years from now, we'll look back on it and say, wow, those were terrible times. But we'll do what we do best. We pick ourselves up and move on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And do you feel like, are you thinking, or do you feel like there may be a de-densification trend that will result out of this? Or do you feel like this will all blow over and in 3 years we'll kind of, like you said, look back and...
So I've been pretty public about saying that I think it's going to be a net wash. I think there are some firms that might decrease their footprint. You heard some of the bigger banks say, oh, we're having a really good experience working from home. And I think part of that is them telling the community that they're functioning well. Yet that's not filtering down to the real estate folks. They're still looking to keep their real estate footprints. And but there might be some decrease in footprint. And I think other firms that have open space architecture might feel that they got too efficient and people are on top of each other, and it's not just a matter of putting plexiglass up between desks. They might want some more traditional office space. If you go into, there's a major New York City bank who actually had WeWork design their space. It's not WeWork space, it's a major bank, but they designed it for them. And they go in and it's almost like hoteling, but they're a major corporate bank. And I think they're going to go back more towards traditional office space. So I think it'll be an even balance over time. So I don't think there'll be a huge net increase. I don't think there'll be a huge net decrease.
And what opportunities do you see resulting from this upcoming economic cycle, and how is Silverstein preparing for these?
Look, on the office side, the office leases are long-term leases. They're 7, 10, 15, 20-year leases. So nothing's going to happen quickly. You're not going to see huge trends. So we were dealing with a lot of tenants prior to the pandemic, and we've stayed in touch with those tenants. And when they're ready to re-engage, we'll re-engage. I don't think those terms will change much. I hope they don't, because the economics haven't changed much. And except for interest rates coming down a little bit, things really haven't changed much. So we'll see. On the residential side, what's interesting on our residential side is as our building populations on the office side has gone from 100% down to 0.5%. So where I had 5,000 people coming a day to 7 World Trade Center, now I have 25 people in World Trade Center. So I have 0.5% of the people there. My 5,000 people living in my Silver Towers and River Place buildings, they're there 24/7. And that's putting strain on the building staff. So it's interesting. So we want to get people back to work. How is that economics going to change? I don't know. I don't know how the residential demand will change. I know that the suburbs have picked up on the rentals a lot. So if you try to go to Westchester or the Hamptons, those rental numbers have gone skyrocketing. That might just be a short-term play. I don't think people are going to be leaving New York City in droves. I don't see that happening. I'm a true believer in the long term of New York City, as you can hear in my voice. So we're not making any huge plans to change what we do, other than, in the short term, think about, helping people through this crisis. The cleaning, traffic patterns, working with government to figure out how to, to get through this.
Thank you for that. Shifting gears a little bit, we deal primarily with MBA students, undergrad students pursuing a career in real estate. A lot of them were set to have an internship this summer and might not be able to experience that internship for MBAs. They only have one opportunity to do that during the summer. Is there any way to duplicate that? I know you sit on the advisory board at Wharton and a number of other institutions, so you're kind of leading, and Shaq as well. So I know you're definitely helping those schools produce the best type of student and candidate for a potential position. So what kind of ways can our students add value to their degree or prepare themselves for a career in real estate?
Yeah, it's really tough. What I'm spending a lot of time on Silverstein is building protocol on how we get people back into our buildings. And so we're having discussions about the summer interns. What do we do? Do we do it virtually? The group that I work with most is our deal team, and we were going to bring in, I think, 4 summer interns. And the question is, how are we going to deal with those summer interns? Do we tell them that it doesn't make sense for them to come in because the deal team itself is not going to be in the office? Do we do it virtually? Do we give them an option? So we haven't decided how we're going to do that yet. But I would urge the students to just communicate or over-communicate with the groups that made them offers and try to be helpful to them in any way they can. Offer their virtual services and ask them how they can be helpful in this time of crisis.
Great, thank you. And what kind of critical skills are you looking for in candidates? Our students always want to know what kind of preparations they can make, and obviously they have some free time on their hands now. We like to try to get them to do as much financial modeling as possible and just try to keep their finger on the pulse. If you have any other advice.
That's a lot of it, competent financial modeling and problem solving, that type of stuff.
Kind of, Marty, kind of shifting gears here as well. Looking beyond this crisis, you've talked a little bit about kind of two-world trade and it being designed to close as carbon neutral as possible. As we're kind of looking into the future of development, what new innovations excite you most in regards to the future of real estate development? What are you excited about?
We're working on the redesign of 2 World Trade Center, and we're trying to make it as carbon neutral as possible. So we're taking everything we learned from all the new technologies that we built into the new buildings at World Trade Center, watching all the new buildings at Hudson Yards, everything that was done at 1 Vanderbilt, 425 Park, and looking at Asia, looking at all over the world, in London, Sydney, everywhere, and trying to figure out what this building should be. And it's going to be really amazing. We're really excited about it. So that's on the office side. You know, you have to really watch how architecture evolves in the future, and it's taking all these trends, and you're always building ahead of time because it takes so much time to build these buildings. You know, a 2.8 million square foot building takes 4 years to build. So by the time you build it, you have to make sure it's not obsolete. So you have to take these factors into account.
Right, and these things that you keep in mind, are they a core value of Silverstein, you would say, or is this something that the tenant requires also, or will be requiring more in the future, or both?
Well, we always like to be on the cutting edge no matter what we do, but it's going to be, it'll be a requirement of the tenants of the future, right? When we built 7 World Trade Center back in 2006, we opened in 2006, yes. It was the first LEED certified office building in New York City, and it was to the gold standard. Everything built at the World Trade Center has been at that standard or higher since we've opened. But we did the first, I think, green lease ever in the city there, and we had our first tenant that came there was West LB. Took the lease because the government, the German government at the time, mandated that it could only go to a gold LEED certified office building, and we were the only one in the city at the time. So it helped, you know, actually get tenants. So forward-thinking tenants will hopefully come to, you know, will be the future of that, which would be, you know, as close to a carbon. You can't get to carbon neutrality for a huge, you know, 1,300 foot tall building today, I don't think, unless you spend trillions of dollars. But we're going to get as close to it as possible and being commercially reasonable.
Very exciting. Marty, do you have any like favorite book recommendations you'd recommend for students?
You know, I was laughing with someone the other day because one of my attorneys wanted to send me a book that he really recommended. And I said, because I'm on like 9 different boards and I'm running this small company, and I actually do a lot of sports. And I said, one of the things I've cut out in my life is books, because I read so much material in the morning online, and I do watch some television at night, and I do all the sports and then just all the board meetings and everything. So I stopped reading books, but I'm reading Gene Cohen's book, which I don't have at my my night table in my bedroom. So read Gene Cohen's new book. He's Cohen Pedersen Fox, great architect.
That's great.
Thank you for that.
What would you say is the most exciting part about your job, and then what's also the most challenging part, would you say?
I'd say the most exciting part is the people, and the most challenging part is the people. Now, the most exciting part is, look, what always got me excited from day one is creating something out of nothing. It's, you know, building a building and saying, wow, I had something to do with that. That excites me. So being part of a development team, because it takes so much to develop a large building, and being part of that team and knowing that you got something accomplished. Like, look what's behind me on my screen. Knowing that I had a part of that is just thrilling. And working with a team to get there, because it is just so all-encompassing and requires tens of thousands of people to get something like that done. And to have a leadership role in that is just phenomenal. The challenging part is that when you build big buildings, there are usually a lot of zeros attached to it. And finding, you know, billions of dollars to do that is not always the easiest thing. And you've got to get a lot of people to believe in what you're doing. And sometimes you have to be ahead of the markets. And so you've got to get some financial people who are not always, you know, paid to be, you know, as aggressive as we are, to take some bets and get there with us. And so that's the challenging part.
Great. What cities or regions do you see growing in the future? I know you have a focus on gateway cities, and that's your core competency, and you do a phenomenal job at that.
We're spending time on markets that sort of emulate downtown New York. So markets where millennials are moving in, there's great public transportation, and there's good building. There's a good stock of buildings that you can either buy at a fraction of replacement costs, or that there's a good market that you can build in where land isn't just at a ridiculous price. So we're spending time, obviously, still in downtown Manhattan, in Seattle, in LA, Philadelphia, and still targeting places like Boston and DC, Dallas, Denver, bunch of cities. But we've really been most active in New York, Seattle, LA, and Philly.
Wonderful. And you mentioned the importance of having public transportation and high quality public transportation. Do you feel that New York City is prepared to continually upgrade its public transportation and infrastructure, or do you feel that they could be doing more?
Well, I'm very confident that a former colleague of mine from Silverstein Properties, Jana Lieber, who's now the head of all construction at all development projects at the MTA, will lead us into the future at the MTA, because he's a phenomenal guy, and helped get the L train open ahead of time and under budget. No, but he's a phenomenal guy under Governor Cuomo to help the future of public transportation. That is one very sensitive topic, though, in this pandemic, and in trying to get our people back. That is the biggest hesitancy right now, is people are deathly afraid of taking public transportation, whether it's the subway or Metro North or Long Island Railroad. And we have to figure out how to ease people's fears of taking public transportation. And one of the solutions was cleaning of the subways every night, which started, I guess, yesterday. And we'll see how that goes. But long-term, people have to get comfortable with public transportation because it's the heart of the city.
Marty, what would you say, just kind of for students who are watching this, what would you say would be the best advice that you've received in your career?
That's a good question. What is the best advice? So I have a bunch of mentors. I've always had a couple of mentors in my career, but because I spent a lot of time with students at Penn and Cornell and NYU and Berkeley, I always tell them a couple things. I say, look, you're young, you're smart, and you're going to work really hard. So you should like what you do. If you're working really hard and you don't like what you do, change it, because now's the time to do it. Don't be 20 years into doing something that you really don't like and figure out you don't like it. So that's a major thing. The second thing I tell them is especially when you're starting out, attach yourself to someone who you think is important at the firm and find ways to really be helpful to them, whether it's being the best analyst or doing the best pitch books or the best reports, or just find a way to be useful to the more important people at the firm. That's how you'll advance. Don't be a kiss ass, but find ways to be useful. What I tell the analysts is, and how I was able to advance was, when you run the numbers, they usually need you because things happen so fast. And when you're in the meetings and things happen, they want to know what happens immediately with the numbers. So if you've got the model and you got the computer in the meeting, they need you in the meeting. So you get invited to the meeting when you run the numbers sometimes.
Great advice. I'll go on a less formal note. What do you miss the most? I know you said you're a big sports guy. What are you looking forward to getting back to?
I was lucky. I was very fortunate. I got a good ski season in. I finished skiing March 17th. I actually got diagnosed on March 18th with COVID-19. So I was actually skiing when I had it. And it didn't affect me. I was very, very fortunate. I got 37 or 38 days in this season. So I was really lucky. But I missed my soul cycle classes in the morning. I'm usually there 6 a.m. every morning, and the week before everything shut down, it was every other bike, and I still went, and I missed it. I'm actually getting my SoulCycle home bike this week.
Oh, wow. That's great. Devin, do you have any final questions?
I do not. Thank you. Thank you very much, Marty, for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. We
Great,
very
guys.
much appreciate it.
You both. Take care. Thanks.